Francis Shen, and together with Maya Reutman, who's here, and Renee Osagi, it's really nice to meet you. These are two members of our team, and thank you to, I see Ishan and Farron here from the Dana Foundation. Thank you to Dana for supporting this work. I'll say more about that in a second, but we're really excited for this. It's a sneak peek. It's a conversational sneak peek at a project that just got started in the fall and that you're going to hear all about. So let me share my slides and we'll get going. So this event is a sneak peek at the new Dana Foundation Career Network in Neuroscience and Society, Achieving Your Action Potential. We've got a fun fact about action potentials to get us started. No disclosures in general. I want to thank all our funders, in particular, the Dana Foundation, for funding this pilot project. And congratulations to everyone. You've made it to Brain Awareness Week. Happy Brain Awareness Week. There are a lot of other ways to get involved. If you haven't already, there's the link. Fun fact, I think probably many of you are here from the neurosciences, but not all of you may be from the neurosciences know what an action potential is. So what is an action potential? This is from Professor Trigler's lab at University of Washington. He's got an amazing website. Action potential is the moment when there's this explosion of energy in the neuron cell down this part of the cell called the axon. And it's the way that neurons communicate with one another. And we thought it was appropriate and hat tip to another member of our team, Ian Stevens, who came up with the idea. Clever pun. Ian is very smart about those, but also meaningful in that action potentials have to reach basically a threshold or they don't go at all. And that's somewhat meaningful for careers as well. That is, you might think about doing that internship, you might think about changing careers, but you can think. It's not until you actually, hit your action potential that you move. And we're going to talk about that. This is an interactive session. We deliberately kept it pretty small. We, spread the word, but not too much. The idea being that this one, as we sort of kind of move in the direction of our public launch, is interactive. So feel free to jump in. And we're going to actually, I think we've got a small enough group that we can do some quick introductions without slowing us down too much. So feel free to keep your video off, turn it on, whatever's appropriate. But we'd love for you to be involved. And we're not breaking the bank, and it's not going to be the nicest gift you ever got, but it's pretty cool, we think. Thanks, Renee, for finding these. At the end, we're going to do a prize drawing, and immediately after, we'll announce the prize. So if you stick around till the end, you could be the brand new owner of one of these two amazing brain gifts. What are we going to do? So first things first, we'll talk just briefly about what is neuroscience in society. It's not actually an easy question. We could talk about that probably for the entire hour, but we'll at least give a preview of what that means. We're going to talk about why we're starting this career network in neuroscience and society. Then I would love to go around the room for anyone who's comfortable, just to briefly say who you are, why you're here. Also, I'll flag at that point, and Maya's going to follow up. If anyone wants to stick around for the second hour, we'll stop recording, we'll go into smaller breakout rooms, and we can just discuss, your individual situations or other questions you have. We'll do that. I think we'll have to do it in small groups because there are a number of folks, I think, from the registration who want to do that, but Maya will help us navigate that. I'll say a little bit about what I do all day. I work at the intersection of neuroscience and society. There are lots of others who do also, so I'll just give my orientation and then give you a little sense of just the rapid growth of these fields. I'll anchor in neuroscience and law, but also mention neuroethics and neuropolitics and neurophilosophy along the way. And then we'll conclude by giving you all a clear sense of what's coming down the pike, things we're really excited and are in development. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this event before the sort of public launch is that we'd really love your input. And so, at any point during this presentation, tell us what would be useful for you, and we're trying to build that. Okay, so first things first, what is neuroscience and society? I think it's a two-way street. On one hand, there are many ways, we'll talk about them, and some of you are already involved in them, in which the things that happen in neuroscience, and neuroscience very broadly defined to mean everything from basic research to applied neurotechnology development to neuroscience clinical work, the digital tools that modify and measure brain function. Broadly defined, these things that we're learning and developing in the neurosciences are having an impact in many areas of society. Now, the most obvious ones are places in medicine, in health, right? A new drug developed with new neuroscience methods is, reducing the risk of Alzheimer's, for instance. A new imaging technology is being able to use, for Parkinson's patients, et cetera. But one of the cool things that we'll talk about today is that neuroscience is not just limited anymore, and really actually never has been, to just the medical and clinical outcomes. It has implications for every area of society, in my view, including law, including the way we interact with each other, education, social work, nursing, and there are many ways now in which this dialogue is occurring. So one version of neuroscience in society is, hey, cool stuff, we're learning about the brain, new ways to measure and manipulate the brain. How can we harness those new pieces of knowledge and new tools in different parts of society? But there's also another arrow going the other way, which is that neuroscience is conducted by humans living in a society within institutions that are societally based and geographically based, right, and historically based. And this is a reality that neuroscience in society as a field also recognizes. Sometimes those links are legal, like parts of society, such as the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, regulates how some neuroscience research can operate. Other parts might be that certain cultural assumptions or power imbalances in society affect the way that neuroscience research has been carried out. And that's certainly been the case and continues to be the case today. So it's really a two-way street, an interaction between neuroscience and society. On one hand, trying to glean the added value of neuroscience for societal applications, and at the same time, trying to understand and enhance what neuroscience and neuroscientists do by understanding where they fit in within all these many, social, political, cultural, racial aspects of the society in which they're operating. We use the term in our career network, Neuroscience and Society, to refer to a wide range of those two-way interactions that I just mentioned on the previous slide. This is interaction between neuroscience and ethics, law, economics, politics, sociology, education, and much more. And we won't have time today to talk about all of these fields, and in fact, there are more. But just to give you a sense, every one of these things listed here, neuroethics, neurolaw, neuroeconomics, neuromarketing, neurophilosophy, neurocriminology, neuroanthropology, neurosociology, neuropolitics, neuroscience and education, we could go on. Neuro times something, the intersection of neuro and more, every one of these areas is active. And every one of these areas is much more active than it was a decade ago. And I'll come back to that in a moment, that these are growing fields. They're still small fields for the most part, but they're growing fields. Why are they growing? Well, my view is that they're growing because they're recognizing that both of those previous aspects of the slide that matter, that neuroscience has important things to say to these fields, but also that these fields have important things to say about neuroscience. So all this stuff is happening, and we'll talk at the end. This is our new website that's under development. If you go to it, you'll just see a placeholder, Neuro times NeuroX careers. The idea being that it's neuro times something, and we're really going to talk about careers. And the thing about careers is that it's one thing to write a college paper in neurophilosophy, philosophy 101, do we have free will? What does neuroscience say? That's one thing. It's very another thing to say, boy, I like these areas so much that I wonder if part of my career could actually be at this intersection, right? Somewhere in this two-way street. Could I be someone who operates, practices, researches, writes, studies, engages the world somewhere in that intersection? And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so why start a career network in neuroscience and society? I'll just give you my view. And again, I'm really grateful to the Dana Foundation for believing enough in this mission to give us a chance to pilot this for a year and see how it goes. So our goal, as proposed for this career network, is to expand and diversify the next generation, that's you on this call, it's everyone on this call, the next generation of neuroscience and society students, practitioners, and scholars. And I will be very frank with you. Why do we need to expand? The expand is because what I just mentioned, all those earlier fields, these fields like growing and growing. We need more really talented, thoughtful, engaged young people working in these areas, I think. But diversify because, let me go back 2 slides. This part where how society shapes the way that neuroscience develops, well, think about all the inequities and all of the fault lines in society. And my presentation today will be really US centric, but with the footnote that if we had another day, and indeed part of the website, we'll start to think about international aspects of things beyond the United States context. We're just starting in one place to illustrate, but it's not meant in any way to say that this is the most important or the only country. It's simply to say we got to start somewhere. So we're starting there. But those fault lines in society show up in the way that neuroscience is practiced and carried out, and also in the way that these fields are practiced and carried out. So what we've been doing, and Maya and Renee will smile when I say this, and the rest of the members of our team, we've been combing these websites and resources for, okay, let's look at who are the leaders in these fields. And it is, I'd say without question, the case that the vast majority of, and they're amazing leaders, but leaders in these fields are not drawn from a really diverse and representative group. And there are a lot of reasons for that. In large part, those fields that I just mentioned are really esoteric. Nobody's ever heard of them. I mean, I'm amazed that you even found this today. I'm so happy you did. But generally, it's been restricted to a pretty elite set of institutions or networks that have even had exposure to this. So of course, the leaders that have emerged aren't coming from all communities, and we really want to change that. So we've got 3 specific goals, and they're interrelated. One is recruit new people, especially from institutions and geographies that have not been reached before, to do this neuroscience and society work. And we're busy doing that. I guess we'll say some more at the end about what we're doing. We also really want to create and especially communicate new opportunities, because let's say you get interested and you're like, okay, but what can I do? Where can I learn more? We're putting together an email newsletter. We'll talk more about that to communicate those opportunities. And the long-term goal, we can't accomplish it all in 1 year, is to lay a foundation, right? If you put the equation together, people plus opportunities could lead, we hope, to new careers. So that's a little bit about where we're coming from. Let me introduce myself. Thanks for all of you for introducing what you do. So I spent 10 years at the University of Minnesota. I'm a professor. I was a law professor by training. And then just this past July, moved to Harvard, where my home is Harvard Medical School Center for Bioethics, and then affiliated with Harvard Law School. And we run a lab that focuses on law, ethics, neuroscience, and AI. And our lab motto is every story is a brain story. And though there are 2 important caveats, I always say when I mention our lab motto, 1, every story is not a fully understood brain story. And that turns out to have major implications for neuroscience and society applications, because when do you know enough about a particular brain circuit or information processing that it should be applied in some area of society? Really tough question. And secondly, every story is not just a brain story. As I've already alluded to, stories are, of course, stories of history and politics and culture and sociology and theology and all these other wonderful things that one can study and understand. So nothing we talk about today should be interpreted as, reduction just to neuroscience. It's the only field that matters. It's not, but it is a really important field. And it intersects with society. So in our lab, we pursue 2 big questions, which really dovetail on the arrows that I showed before. On one hand, we think about how can better understanding of mind, brain, behavior relationship and the tools, including AI tools that help us understand that, improve the law. And that raises a lot of ethical and deep bioethics questions that we encounter. And then the flip side is, okay, how do you regulate or enhance or promote awesome neuroscience, technology development and research and clinical practice? And how do you unleash sort of that power without, or with at least mitigating some of the potential negative consequences? And that raises a lot of ethics questions around what do you value? What are your value systems, and how do you ensure that you're living up to them? So what do we actually do in the lab? We do all kinds of work, empirical and theoretical research. So we do some research that looks like hypothesis testing that you're used to. We do a lot of community engaged research and education and outreach, either in legislatures or with youth groups. We collaborate a lot. So, just some of the many hundreds of RAs who've been in the lab and hundreds of co-authors. So, it's a really collaborative effort, and we publish on a wide range of topics, none of which I'll talk about today. If you're interested more in law and neuroscience, lawneuro.org is one site, and the other group that I work a lot with is called the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior, where we try and live up to this ambition that better decisions aligned with science, we think, can produce better outcomes aligned with justice. Okay, so that's a little bit of where I'm coming from. So I've spent most of my world in the neuroethics and neurolaw side of things, but we're going to reach these other areas, and I could pull from the headlines all over the place. I just want to make the point that neuroscience and society has been with us for a long time. In these next slides, sometimes good, sometimes really good, sometimes bad, sometimes really bad, and sometimes just really vexing, like raising difficult questions. So this is just from a few days ago, March 10th. This happened to be an article in the Baltimore newspaper about a man who had been convicted wrongfully, was released, and is now writing with his attorney about the importance of applying adolescent brain science in changing the way that courts handle young adults, right? So a very active area there. I could have pulled many neuromarketing. In fact, I've got right over there, I should actually pull it off my shelf, a book by Nita Farahany, The Battle for Your Brain, and thinking about how private companies are now investing. But this isn't new. So let's go back to almost 100 years, or 1939. Already people were thinking, say, about do you have a criminal brain? I mean, this is rudimentary science, but it's new because brain science has always been tantalizing. I mentioned there have been some really good stories around neuroscience and society, and I think one of these is epilepsy. So you may not know this, but historically, not just in the United States, but across the world, epilepsy, before we understood what it was, individuals with what we would now diagnose as epilepsy were often scorned. And if you can think about it for a second, you can kind of understand why. That is, some member of the community suddenly starts having unexplained seizures. And one thought was that what was happening is that these were evil spirits. This person had done something wrong, and they were being punished by evil spirits. Some communities even believed that it was contagious, whatever was happening to this person. So not only would they not help them, because who wants to help someone who's done bad things and is getting punished, but in addition, they'd sort of avoid them because they didn't want to, have this epilepsy spread. Over time, as we began to understand what epilepsy is, the world of epilepsy and the law really changed. There was a moment where epileptics couldn't marry and have children. Can imagine that. But today, and this is right from the Epilepsy Foundation webpage, we know that the human brain is a source of all human epilepsy. And although it's not been cured, although it's still, a need for more additional research and clinical practice, it is the case that the stigma has really dropped. So it's a wonderful example. I said I spent about 10 years at the University of Minnesota, and this is a picture from a football game at the University of Minnesota. Our previous coach was named Jerry Kill, and he had epilepsy. And he had an epileptic seizure multiple times over the course of his time at the University of Minnesota. One of them happened, I was at the game during halftime, or during the first half of the game. Now, nobody, everyone was concerned about him and supportive, but no one sat there and said, oh, that darn Coach Kill, why did he choose to have a seizure right now? And everyone understood that this was something that you can try your best to control through medications and other maybe implantable technology, but that was a brain disorder, a brain disease that needed to be treated. And there wasn't a moral judgment attached to it. And you might just think about, neuroscience society questions, bigger ones, like how many other scenes could we someday have like this, where you say, hey, we understand that the behavior you're exhibiting isn't an evil spirit, isn't, the manifestation of something evil inside you, but it has something to do with those axons and action potentials and the way that your circuits are firing together, and we stand with you, right? So I think it's a pretty positive set of developments. But not everything in neuroscience and in society has been positive. Again, my examples come from neuroscience and law. We can give you other examples as well if we have more time. One colleague has written that history has shown us the repeated policy failures of a biologically based approach to criminal justice, and nowhere is that more clear than in the search for the so-called violent brain. I could give you, a 2-hour lecture on it. I won't. I'll give you 90 seconds to say that this picture here, if you can see it, is a commemorative stamp for a neuroscientist, Egas Manoukian, who won the Nobel Prize for developing this technique. Now, if we were live, maybe I'll actually, anybody know what this technique was for? Anybody want to unmute and say, what is this device? I know. Going. Okay, this is for the prefrontal lobotomy. Heard of lobotomy, and you're probably like, right. That is the reaction to have. It is actually a certain form of, psychosurgery is used today for, in rare cases. But at the time, this is back in 1933, the commemorative stamp is later, and in 1948, the Yale Law Journal said, hey, this seems like a really cool idea. Perfection of so relatively simple and inexpensive rehabilitative technique as the prefrontal lobotomy promises to be a major contribution to the cure of criminals. Thankfully, it was never widely implemented. It would have been horrible if it had been, but just a warning that advances in neuroscience and neurotechnology aren't always leading to the good, and we've got to be cautious about that. Okay, so historical warnings and historical context given, let's jump ahead to just 12 years ago. And this could be said, I think, for a lot of the neuro and fields, that somewhere in the 10 to 20 years ago, in the last couple of decades, they started to emerge. And as they emerged, they initially met with a lot of skepticism. And I experienced this. So we've got a big case book in law and neuroscience. And in order to get a book published, you've got to send it to reviewers. And here's what one of the reviewers said. The topics in your book are so hypothetical and conjectural that most students will find the course impractical. Most professors are left wondering what, if anything, neuroscience can ever say that's truly useful to law. And the same sort of reaction was held in other places. Can neuroscience tell us anything about philosophy, about marketing, about education? Why is neuroscience doing here? Well, I'm happy to say that the other reviewers were more positive. We got that book published, and 6 years later, about 50% of the material was new. Things move that fast in neuroscience and society work. Just in neuroscience and law, there are more cases, there are more pieces of legislation, there are more pieces of scholarship. We track these. And why? Because a lot in law and a lot in marketing and philosophy and sociology and ethics hinges on how brains work. And so in many of these fields, what were once sort of hypothetical questions, like in the criminal law, did my neurons make me do it, have now become actual criminal defenses. So let me just give you, a few words on these other areas. So, and I can't go through all of them because I want to save time at the end for discussion before we break out. So I want to save at least 15 minutes. Neuroethics is a discipline that helps us think about reflexive practice. That's fancy words for saying thinking carefully about what you or your field does and why you do it. What are the values? How does the technology or the research or the in a commercial enterprise that you're doing promote or not promote those values? And neuroethics really helps us see, I think, a lot of that second arrow, that neuroscience and these neuroscience and society questions aren't happening in a vacuum, right? They incorporate and must engage with ethical, legal, social, political, cultural context. I would also suggest to you that neuroethics is a term that we can understand meaning both ethical, legal, and social implications. That's kind of a catchphrase in this field to say, hey, when you develop a new technology or you've got new neuroscience understanding, it has implications beyond the clinic, but also to integrate, and this has really been realized, I'd say, the last 5 years, concerns around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. For instance, all those MRI imaging studies that are driving neuromarketing and neurophilosophy and neurolaw, take a close look at the demographic populations, the population demographics and descriptors of who's participating in those studies. And when you lift up the hood and you look at it, you're like, okay, this is not representative at all of the US population, let alone other parts of the world. So these issues are ripe as well. Several of you have mentioned neuromarketing. So neuromarketing has also really taken off over the last, again, roughly 2 decades. Was there stuff before? Yeah. But, kind of a lot of these fields are kind of in the same zone of development. Neuromarketing, and again, it goes by other names as well, but roughly the idea that the brain, right, is in connection with the rest of the body, is the organ that's responsible for the information, the type of information processing that marketers care about, right? So you're marketing a product or an idea in order to change thinking and behavior in humans, and the way that you change thinking and behavior in humans is you change the way that information is processed, and that processing of information leads to change in behavior. You see the ad for this particular insurance company, and if you're a sports fan or basketball fan right now at March Madness, it seems like you're going to be inundated with, Capital One images, right? And you want to think about how does the brain process that information. And it's thought that maybe understanding at the neural level these customers' motivations, preferences, decisions may improve the things that are done, by marketers. Now, this raises a lot of ethical concerns as well. One thing I want to point out is that these fields go together. So neuroethics is related to neuromarketing because of questions like brain privacy, right? They're related to neurolaw because of questions like regulation and Federal Trade Commission. And copyright. These areas are interrelated. So too, if we just pick another one, I'm going to just give two more examples. One is neuropolitics. So this is from a few years ago, but I like the headline. Again, what are politicians trying to do? We don't think about it this way. Politicians are using their brains to communicate. And all we do when we communicate is send out information. Our sensory organs receive that information, right? Then process it. And based on that processing, we do something. Like we vote for candidate X, or we vote for candidate Y, or we don't vote at all. And because the brain, again, is at the centerpiece of that information processing, the thought in this field is that if we better understand the information processing machinery, boy, we might be able to do the job that we've been asked to do better. That is, we might be able to get more people to vote for X, or less people to vote for Y, or more support for our policy. In some ways, all of these fields have been asking brain questions all along, but now theoretically, they're starting to think of them as brain questions. And methodologically, there may be some possibility of getting new types of measurements to complement. I think all of these fields would say complement, not replace, behavioral measures. All right, so just one more example, and to illustrate how new this stuff is. If I was giving this presentation a year ago, I could not have this slide. Why? Because the new Journal of Neurophilosophy was only launched this past summer. It didn't exist a year ago. That is how fast these fields move. Now, neurophilosophy is really fascinating because they dive into deep questions. Neuroscience doesn't just give us like new tools to change the way somebody votes. Neuroscience raises deep, deep questions such as, do we have free will? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not even going to try. But the cool thing is that there's a field called neurophilosophy that is trying carefully to think about the deep philosophical and theoretical implications of these findings in neuroscience, right? And again, new. It's really exciting. All right. So given all of these developments, we've taken a look, and as I said at the outset, I've got a concern that the folks getting involved in the fields, the ones I just mentioned, there aren't enough of them, and those who are getting involved aren't coming from diverse enough communities, and just people don't know about them, right? And I'm so glad that you're here because somehow you found out, but we want to spread the word. So what are we doing in our career network? So we're preparing a regular email newsletter. If you're here, it means if you already have your email, you're going to be on that newsletter. We're developing a website. I'll talk about that in a second. We're creating a virtual career fair scheduled for fall 2024. We're figuring out exactly how we're going to schedule that. Maybe it's going to be a week where like one day's neuromarketing and the next day's neuroethics and the next day's neurolaw. Maybe it's going to be a big smorgasbord and we like do it all. We're figuring that out. But we're going to launch that for the start of the fall. That'll be our big event. We're doing a lot of direct outreach. So Renee and Maya and our team, if you want to volunteer, you can be on the team. We're out of paid positions. You want to volunteer. We are combing like through these databases and finding all sorts of schools. And then we go on their website and we find like the psychology undergrad organization at this school that has never heard of any of the slides I just mentioned. And we're sending emails and it's working. And we're saying, hey, can we give you a presentation on neuroscience and society? Because that's the way many people learned about this, right? They heard about it in a lecture. A friend told them about it. We want to hook people in. We're also thinking about, we're doing a lot of direct outreach to relevant organizations. These would be groups that offer master's programs and or graduate programs, groups that might hire students for internships or for programs. And we're compiling that. We'll get it up on the website, and we're asking them to participate in our career fair as well. So I'll close with the website, but I want to say just a couple words about this process, and then it looks like we can probably say about 10 minutes for just general questions before we do some breakout rooms. It's really tough to build a career in neuroscience and society. This is just as an example of neuroscience and law, but you could fill this out for any one of the areas, and indeed, sort of we are doing this on the website, which is, one hand, we can't answer this question for. It's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Who do you want to be? And increasingly, that answer can change. So what do you want to be when you grow up first? And then what do you want your second career, your third career to be? Okay. Can't answer that, but can influence it, because you can't dream of being something that you've never heard of. And again, that's part of the problem, that when I went to college, I could have actually, when I graduated college, and it was 2000, I could have made a list of 10,000 possible careers I would have had. And you know what would not have been on that list? A career in neuroscience and society. Why? Because I had never heard of it, because no one had ever heard of it. Right? And in graduate school, I just happened to be exposed to it. And it really, we can talk about that in breakout, how my own career developed, but became very important to me. All right. But yeah, let's say that you get to the point like, I think I might want a career in neuromarketing, neurophilosophy, neuro law. All right. How do you train for that? Is it about the coursework? Is it about the skill development? Is it about the networking? How do you get connected to folks? This is really where we're trying to provide some steps in that direction by at least consolidating and simplifying some of your searching. I mean, we're not funded to have career counselors in neuroscience and society the way your career offices are, but at least we're compiling resources. How do you actually become a successful candidate? And how do you actually find a job? Now, typically the thought is that, it goes like this, right? You figure out what you want and then you do. That's not the reality. Because the reality is you have to make some hard choices and you don't really know what you want. So again, these are legal, this is like a law example, but we could make this example for neuromarketing, we can make it for neuroethics, for many of these things. All of these folks could be involved in neuroscience and society: an attorney, a professor, a researcher, a clinician, policymaker, especially clinician. And how would you know? Well, sometimes you don't know until you've had some experience in networking. I'm sure many of you have had that experience. So like, I always thought I wanted to be a doctor, and then I spent a summer in the hospital and realized, no, I do not want to be a doctor, right? But you wouldn't have known until you tried it, right? I think I want to do X, but how do I know? Because I've never tried X. And neuroscience and society is the sort of thing that's hard to even quite imagine, right? Like you kind of know what it might be to teach fourth grade. No, not exactly. I mean, my grade school teacher friend, they're probably hammering me and say, look, you don't know until you've been in the classroom, and I respect that. But at least you have some idea. You've seen it in action, okay, at least. No, you have no idea what a neuroscience and society person does. And again, we're hoping to help a little bit with that on this website to maybe help navigate some of these questions. All right, so I wanted to close with this slide and one more, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussion. So our website, and you'll all hear about it once it launches. I mean, it's alive, but just see this placeholder. As I said before, we're working on these sort of these primers, kind of for like, what is a career in neuromarketing? What does a career in neurolaw look like? Curated links so that we've done the work to give you a sense of, look, here's this society. This is the first place you go if you're interested. They've got 10,000 links. We're doing some interviews with professionals who we think you might want to hear from and their career paths. They're a link over to a job board. We're not a job board ourselves, but we're just going to, again, link to some places might be available. And this is co-creation. So if you haven't heard that phrase before, co-creation, it means that the affected individuals, like students or mid-career, can have a say in how we develop this career network. This is an experiment. This is a pilot year. It's a planning grant year. And, we hope to develop more, but the success of this year probably depends in large part on making sure that we're aligned with actual needs. And so that's why it's really nice that you're here, because we'd love to hear from you. Renee is fielding our, email inquiries if you want to learn more, if you want to volunteer. So I think, Renee, you can put your email in the chat also.